No? Okay. I'll now call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:31 p.m. Can you please call the roll?
Ms. Pearson, Mr. Rollins.
Here.
Ms. Mohammed. Here. Mrs. McCulloch.
Here.
Mr. Siegel.
Here.
Mr. Connor. Ms. Stanford.
Here.
With 5 present, 2 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, thank you, Kathy Bear. She's working behind the scenes to produce tonight's broadcast on Channel 20. I also would like to welcome the SSAC student representative. And Jawaria, oh, this is really good.
Jawaria Zaharullah.
Thank you. I didn't want to be unkind, so thank you so much. And you can pronounce it for us again at the end of the month when you get to do your report. But we appreciate your being here, and you're from Auburn High School. Awesome, thank you. So we have the meeting minutes from 12/7/21. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? If not, is there a consensus to approve? Thumbs up? Good, thank you. Mr. Siegel. We're going to give you the floor to lead the internal external stakeholders committee portion of the meeting.
Thank you very kindly. So for our featured update, we first of all do have an update from the College and Career Readiness about the Academy Expo. So I'll turn the floor over to Bridget French.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Heidi. Good evening. My name is Bridget French. I'm the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness for the district, and I am here to give you a brief presentation on the 2021 Academy Expo, which took place on October 20th at the Indoor Sports Center at Mercy Health Sports Core 2. The Academy Expo is a career exploration fair for 9th graders. Our industry experts host booths to demonstrate regional careers, and hospitality ambassadors are volunteers from various companies that help make the day happen. We had almost 1,900 freshmen attend this year. That's almost all of our freshmen. 94 companies attend, highlighting over 100 careers, which is a big win for us. We had a lot of companies that have historically participated not participate this year due to COVID. So our team worked really hard to make sure that we had careers demonstrating and representing all of our pathways. We had 450 industry experts, those are the career demonstrators, almost 80 volunteers, and 100% of all of the community members there said they intend to return next year, which is always a key data point that we like to see. We had a QR code that all students scanned on their way out to the bus after the Academy Expo was over, and they took a survey on the way back to school. We asked them, did you feel safe and comfortable at the expo? They overwhelmingly said yes. We asked them if they felt prepared. Also, mostly excellent to average scores. And we'll give you this presentation so you can go deeper into the data if you wish to do so. How did they like interacting with the people at the booths? They very much enjoyed that. And how did they rate their overall experience? Again, very, very high positive outcomes. How did you rate the amount of time at each booth? So we've played with the numbers quite a bit over the years on the amount of time that students spend at each booth, because we want to make sure that they get a good representative of all the academies and pathways, but that they're also not bored. We always have students that say not enough or too much, but we like to see, you know, somewhere over 50% for just right, and we definitely hit those numbers this year.
Excuse me, Bridget, did you say it's not in our, this is not on our board docs?
It is not, no.
If you'd like to come back up here, Bridget.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Mr. Dotson. This is one of the most important parts of the Academy Expo right here. Does it help confirm the decision that they've made? So you may recall all freshmen take a course called College and Career Readiness, in which they explore all of the different academies and pathways. And they spend a lot of time doing that up to the expo, after the expo as well. But we want them to have a good idea going into the expo what academy and pathway they think they might want to choose. And then this is an opportunity for this experience to either confirm their decision or help them make a new decision. And so what we look for is that it helps them either affirm or think, hey, I never even thought this was an option for me, and now I see that it is because of this event. So this is some of the feedback. All the students had an opportunity to write an open-ended response, and we aggregated those into these key statements here, that they really enjoyed meeting with community members, exploring careers, participating in hands-on activities, and meeting people. I think everyone had a real sense of togetherness. We did not hold the expo last year because of COVID, so there was a lot of excitement, especially from our community partners, about being able to see our students again, and the variety of businesses there. And then we ask our hospitality ambassadors, again, those are the volunteers that are at the event, how did they feel? Did they feel supported in communication and organization in their overall experience? And overall, they had a very positive experience. Same with our industry experts. Those are the people that host the booths that actually do the hands-on career demonstrations for our students. How did they experience the event in organization, communication, and support in their overall experience as well? We also give out awards to the company or organization that have what is voted on as the best booth. We pair a student ambassador with a community volunteer, and we have a rubric that they fill out together to choose what's the best booth in each academy. And that rubric includes how engaging is their demonstration, how are they communicating with students, are students interested in their booth? And the community members always really get a kick out of this. They love when they're announced the winner, and these are some of the winners from this year. And then this is just a quote that we received from one of our industry experts that's been around for almost all of our Academy Expos. This was our 10th year, and that, I think we all felt this year was one of the best Academy Expos we had, and kudos to all of our team and the volunteers that helped make it happen, as it really was one of the best, smoothest expos that we've had to date. So what's next for the CCR team? We continue to get guest speakers into our classrooms to bring more career awareness to our freshmen to help us, again, affirm their academy choice. We want all of our sophomores to have a site visit to, again, affirm their academy choice. We have one of our first years we were doing academies, we had a student go into a medical clinic and pass out when she saw blood and knew that that was not the right academy for her. So those experiences are pretty critical to helping students understand what they're choosing for the next 3 years. Our juniors have a job shadow, which is 3 to 4 hours long, in which they watch the community partner demonstrate a career, then they do it together, and then the student does it on their own. We have a business entrepreneurship class called Incubator, which is heavily supported by community members as students develop a business of their own. And then we are working on developing internships. We have 3 that have started on a pretty small scale. One is within our own IT department here, which has been amazing to work with them. We have internships of our students in the education pathway actually going into our other feeder schools to do internships, and then over the summer we have some manufacturing partners that are doing internships. We're always looking for more partners, and that's something our team is working on currently as well. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this time.
I have just one.
Sure.
I noticed on the student responses on the survey that Roosevelt generated 100% responses on each thing. Is that an indication that there was like only one student from
There were
Roosevelt?
only 13 students there from Roosevelt, but I mean, considering they have a very small group of freshmen at Roosevelt, that was all of them. That was all of their freshman students, so we were excited that they had such a good experience.
Was there something about the expo that particularly appealed to Roosevelt students that they got? I mean, 13 is not a very huge number, but that it's unanimous seems unusual to me.
Well, they're freshmen by credits, but they are a little bit older, so I don't know if that has something to do with it. Maybe they've been, you know, have a little bit better of an idea of maybe what they wanted to do, and it affirmed that. I'm not really sure. That was the only connection that I was able to really make there.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Sure.
David? Oh, go ahead.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
So once the freshmen attend the expo and they select their academy, what's the likelihood of them changing their minds? Like, do they have the option to go to another academy or no?
They do. So that's part of the reason why we do the site visits when they're a sophomore, is because they can change their mind when they're a sophomore and they can change academies. We really don't want them to do it any later than that because of the 3-course sequence. They have 3 courses that really build upon the knowledge of the previous course, their sophomore, junior, and senior year. So it's pretty critical that if they're going to change, they do it when they are a sophomore. But usually around the time that a student has the site visit is when they decide to change.
Thank you.
Sure.
My question was just, you said there were 94 companies, we were down a bunch. What have we had in the past? What's our high, what's our low?
Typically we have somewhere between like 130 and 150 booths. And those booths are staffed from anywhere between 2 and 10 employees, depending on the size of the company. So we were down quite a bit, but especially in the healthcare area for obvious reasons, that was our biggest drop this year.
Thank you. And I'll tell board members that Ms. Fromm has now put that on board docs if you want to see that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then if we could get back to the slide deck for the internal, external stakeholders. Thank you. And then if we could get to slide 3. Thank you. Our first segment today is Celebrating RPS 205, where we focus on student and faculty achievement. First, we would like to congratulate our Questbridge Scholarship winners, Anju Griffith, who will be attending Stanford University, and Caleb Bonzi, who will be going to Boston College. College expenses will be covered the next 4 years for these Guilford High School seniors, including tuition and fees, room and board, books, supplies, and travel through the Questbridge College Match Scholarship. They are 2 of 1,064 scholarship applicants admitted to 45 partner colleges and universities through the Questbridge and granted a full 4-year scholarship worth over $200,000 each. Sure. Anju is interested in pursuing a career in the medical field. Caleb will be attending the Robert J. Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences at Boston College with an interest in a double major in political science and computer science. You know, the talent today is beyond spectacular, so I couldn't be more proud of these 2. Next, we want to applaud the...
David?
Yes.
Could you take a question on what,
Please.
I'm trying to look it up here, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what Questbridge is. Does anybody know? Yay!
So from what I know about QuestBridge is it's basically a scholarship program where you apply to all of the schools that a student would wish to match with, and each of the schools views the student's application, and if the student would get into the school otherwise, they are accepted, and if QuestBridge selects them based on their merit, their grades, and their extracurriculars, they basically get matched, which means they get a full ride to that school, which is really rare. So it's really amazing that both of them did that, especially for Stanford and Boston College, because those are both such prestigious schools.
But
So-
it's not just for financial, so they consider the whole student.
They do consider the whole student, but the QuestBridge scholarship is given priority to lower income families.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, aims to support low-income students of all backgrounds. Got it. Well, thank you.
Thank you for filling in. Appreciate that. Next, we want to applaud the outstanding employees of RPS 205. Each month, Dr. Jarrett delivers messages of congratulations and candy bars to individuals who have been nominated by their peers as living the values of continuous improvement, collaboration, character, or communication. Last month, 44 individuals and the payroll team were given shout-outs by their colleagues. And so they were duly recognized by Dr. Jarrett. This is a real positive thing for me to see. There has been a call for a greater presence from the administration to acknowledge and recognize the efforts of our staff, and I appreciate Dr. Jarrett making that effort. Our 205 Vibe section is next. As a reminder, the 205 Vibe is where we tell the district stories through blog posts, podcasts, videos, and news. Our top item this week was January transportation. All bus routes covered, almost perfectly. And I think we need to recognize the work of operations and transportation. Mike Phillips and Mike Slice teams have worked very hard to fill a pipeline of qualified bus drivers. This is a particular challenge because the transportation industry across the country has been really struggling to find a full staff to hang on to. And this has been a real job getting this pipeline filled this year, and I appreciate their efforts. They've done a good job of getting this filled up. And then upcoming podcasts will feature the RU pathway. Congratulations to RPS 205 teachers who are among the 20 finalists for the prestigious Golden Apple Teacher Awards for 2022. Recognized are Deanna Ballard, who teaches science at Guilford High School, Weston Brabeck, band and choir at Guilford High School, Matthew Green, English at Roosevelt Community Education Center, Lori Hill, special education at Eisenhower Middle School, Mark J. Peterson, ESL and Literacy Intervention at Auburn High School, and Chelsea Spinello Johnson, Literature at Thurgood Marshall School. Congratulations to all of these nominees. I understand that 205 had more nominees than any other district in the area, so that's very good news. Our next update is regarding legislative news, and I will turn it over to Dr. Jarrett, who will update us regarding his recent meetings with our legislators.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. So far, I've had the privilege of meeting with Senator Stadelman and Representative Vella. We've recently added Senator Severson, which is not included for January as well. We've really had two major urgent topics to talk about. One is House Bill 2778, which I've informed the board has to do with sick leave being that's COVID related being returned to our faculty and staff. The issue that we have with that is not that we want to see teachers rack up lots of sick days. It's that it kind of went through the legislature without much management input, and we are concerned and making our legislators concerned that as the governor considers vetoing this legislation, which has some bipartisan support, and he may not, and there may still be enough for an override, I want to encourage our local legislators to continue to negotiate with management associations like LUDA, which I'm a part of, the IASA, the Illinois School Board Association, et cetera, because ultimately there are some unintended consequences we fear that if you give all of those sick days back without some other checks and balances in place, we would run the risk of further exacerbating our teacher shortage and our substitute teacher crisis. So in some ways, the teachers who are most stressed out from finding ways to come day after day after day, they would be disproportionately impacted if teachers who have disproportionately been not attending. So that would be the issue that we're trying to navigate potentially there. We certainly feel strongly about teachers having support during the pandemic, but we're hoping we can come up with a way that doesn't actually put inadvertent additional stress on teachers. So that's one issue. Second issue we've been really trying to emphasize is relatively recent as well as longer term issues related to contact tracing and the 10-day quarantine that still is in existence for our faculty, staff, and students during the pandemic. While we certainly value safety, and we're seeing a major spike with numbers, we also have seen our district's attendance rate hover in the low 80s as opposed to the low 90s where it typically is. And we believe that the state's very, very cautious approach has really dramatically impacted that. The CDC is now recommending 5 days, and the Illinois, I was part of some conversations at the state level with Dr. Ezike from the state of Illinois as well. And I think we're making some progress on this issue. We would like to see both really go back to the older model of when you're sick, you stay home, and when you come to school, we're still going to be wearing masks for the foreseeable future, and we're not seeing a lot of spread. So we would really like to see some partnership at the state level regarding ensuring students, staff are not for extended periods of time quarantined. So those have really been the two big issues I've tried to discuss in my initial meetings with Representative Vella and Senator Stadelman. And so far, I think those conversations have gone well, and I will continue to keep the board informed on both issues.
Thank you, Dr. Jarrett. Next, we want to remind you that our legislative breakfast will be Tuesday, February 8th at East High School from 8:15 to 10:15. Representatives West and Sosnowski have confirmed they will attend. Senator Stadelman is a tentative yes, and Representative Vella is unable to attend, but will send his chief of staff, Ricardo Montoya Picasso, in his place. Please let Laura Fromm know if you will be attending. And in internal external news, graduation dates have been announced. Details of the graduation ceremonies will be sent to board members. In December, Superintendent Student Advisory Council, if we could move on to the next slide. Oh, we got it, never mind. In December, Superintendent Student Advisory Council members shopped for RPS 205 students with funds from the SSAC budget, as well as donations they collected themselves. Items purchased included hats, gloves, socks, and deodorant. And then the last slide is the board calendar. While we do not have any specific events to highlight in January, this is your reminder to check the calendar frequently as we update it on a regular basis. And it does have a very conspicuous button there on the board docs homepage. Thank you very much. And are there any questions or comments? Mr. Rollins?
I'm just curious. It says graduation dates announced all at Guilford at 6 p.m.
That is correct.
So all of the graduations are going to be held at Guilford this year?
That is correct.
Is there some explanation for that?
What's that?
Is there an explanation for that? I assume there is.
I believe, Dr. Jarrett, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was just to sort of streamline logistics and make sure that we were able to provide all of the same sort of setup and experience for all 4 graduations, and that this year it'll be at Guilford, and if this goes well, we would rotate, or we would go back and forth between the field house, or the fields.
That's correct. We would rotate back and forth between Wyeth Stadium and Swanson Stadium each year, and the idea of having it all in one place is one more elaborate stage setup for a more reasonable cost and an easier to maintain structure. And then finally, we wanted to have all on separate nights so that we were able to have board, faculty, staff, students, families. Obviously families are going to just be attending one, but many of us were forced to choose between ceremonies this year. So the idea of just spreading it over a week at one location was deemed the best opportunity.
So is it in their gymnasium, or will it be in the field house? And how many?
There's a rain date. They will all be at the football stadium, Swanson Stadium.
Oh, they're out too now.
And then next year,
and I missed it.
Yeah, and then next year we'll switch to Wyeth. From a pandemic perspective and a seating capacity perspective, it ends up being a safe option. Principals felt like it saved money. It was, other than the potential heat and weather conditions, there were a lot of really positive things about it.
And when is the rain date?
I believe the rain date is the 11th, is ringing true to me. It's the following Saturday.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other lights, I will conclude this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stanford, will you please lead the Performance and Monitoring Committee portion of the meeting? Floor is yours.
Tonight we have 2 board policy revisions and 2 presentations. At the end of our time, we'll preview the consent agenda. First, a brief explanation of the board policy revisions. Questions about these revisions can be directed to Ms. Hoadley or Ms. Goldsmith. Board Policy 4.60, revisions to Board Policy 2.172, Board of Education, use of consultants, describe which contracts may be presented as part of the budget attachment and defined budget attachment. Corrections to Board Policy 4.60, operational services, purchases and contracts, replicate revisions to Board Policy 2.172. Board Policy 4.80, the policy was updated to include the practice of requesting an extension for the annual audit. Accounting revenue recognition did not agree with practice, therefore, revenue language was updated. Revolving funds were eliminated with the implementation of InTouch software, and the procedures had changed, but the policy had not been updated. Are there any questions about either of those? David?
This looks like there were changes largely to address accountability with spending federal dollars through ARP and ARP-ESSER. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry, please repeat the question.
So this just looked like this was to update for accountability for for the.
So are we talking about the facility, what we're doing right now?
No, for the.
Yes.
For these 2 policies.
Yeah, so 4.60, the changes there are pretty minimal. One of the changes was, again, to align with the budget attachment A process, right? So they struck the language that says that purchases not in the budget require prior board approval, because there's an explanation of the budget attachment process in the paragraph preceding that. And then, and toward the bottom of page 2 of 3 and the top of page 3 of 3 in 4.60, there's language that complies to bring into accord with new laws. One is about a coal tar sealant disclosure act, and another is related to the GATA Transparency Act, federal laws and state laws. And then in 4.80, The changes there are fairly minimal as well. Towards the middle of the page 2 of 3, they create an exception for cash on hand for athletics. And that's it.
Next, we'll take a look back at the facilities plan presented by our operations team. Mr. Mike Phillips, Chief Operations Officer, will present the 2012-2022 master plan.
Good evening. This past summer, we completed our 10 years facilities master plan. I wanted to take a few moments tonight to reflect on our journey and to recognize the past and present board members and community partners that made this plan possible. In October of 2011, the Board of Education requested a detailed physical assessment of its educational facilities. At that time, buildings ranged in age from 1907 to 1999 with an average age of 68 years. In August of 2012, the school board approved a resolution calling for a referendum on the November 6, 2012 ballot to issue general obligation bonds to fund facility improvements. On November 6th of that same year, 65% of our voters approved the bond referendum, allowing the district to issue $139 million in general obligation bonds to fund the district-wide renovations. In the spring of 2013, renovations and construction began. In August 2014, the school board approved a resolution calling for a question on the November 4th, 2014 ballot, which was to acquire one or more sites to build one or more schools. In November of that same year, 74% of our voters approved the referendum, allowing the construction of 2 new schools using proceeds of the $139 million bond issuance that voters approved back in 2012. In the winter of 2016, construction crews broke ground on Cherry Valley Elementary School. In the fall of 2017, construction crews broke ground on Constance Lane Elementary School, which was a $19.8 million, 86,000 square foot building for K through 5 students. In the summer of 2018, construction finished on Cherry Valley Elementary School. And in August, students and staff at Cherry Valley Elementary School entered their new school for the first time. This is the first new school opened since 1999. In the summer of 2019, construction was completed on the Constance Lane Elementary School. And in September of that year, students and staff entered Constance Lane for the first time. And then this August in 2021, we completed construction and updates from the 10-year facilities master plan. Buildings range in age now from 1922 to 2019 with an average age of 50 years. I want to talk a little bit about how our funds were spent on these much needed renovations. $47.8 million was spent in classrooms, cafeterias, and gymnasium additions at 18 elementary schools. $42 million on field houses, classrooms, and gymnasium upgrades at Auburn, East, Guilford, and Jefferson. And $38.2 million on our 2 new schools. Additionally, we spent $30.8 million on mechanical, electrical, and plumbing upgrades at 25 schools, $19.7 million on interior finishes, which included painting and flooring at 34 schools, $16.5 million on new windows at 21 schools, $16.2 million in deferred maintenance, including tuck pointing and parking lot replacement and repairs. And lastly, $3.1 million in demolition of 9 buildings. Funding for this work came from various sources, which included $139 million in general obligation bonds, $50 million in reserve pledge, $18 million in health life safety bonds, $9 million in corporate property, personal property replacement tax, $25 million in qualified school construction bonds, and $9 million in health, life, safety, operation, and maintenance funds. Taking a look at our plan versus actual expenditures, our budget was $279 million. The final cost was $285 million, an overage of $6 million or 2%. I'd like to address 3 specific areas that are included in that overage. During the winter of 2020, we identified issues with the Cherry Valley parking lots due to poor subsoil conditions. This caused a replacement of both parking lots, which cost $900,000. Additionally, abatement was originally budgeted at $7.3 million. Actual costs came in at $8.8 million. During the final 3 years of our interior renovations, we continued to abate flooring and mastic as a health, life, safety measure. And lastly, furniture had been budgeted at $13 million. It came in at $14.1 million due to price increases over the time span and to ensure that all classrooms received new furniture. I'd like to thank Kathy Baer, Kate Specht, Ann DeLang, and our finance team for their assistance with the presentation and the brochure that I provided everybody at their desk. And lastly, I'd like to thank Rockford School Board members from October 2011 through August 2021, the Facilities Task Force, and the Facilities Plan Oversight Committee for your passion and direction throughout this 10-year plan. Thank you.
Are there any comments, questions? Oh, Jude.
Would you repeat what the average span was prior to the?
So we went from 68 years was the average age of the buildings back in 2011, and at the completion it's 50 years. So reduce the average age by 18 years.
The span, the age span from.
Oh, excuse me, where it started at, Jude?
Yeah.
1907 to 1999.
And then it ended at, we got rid of the 07,
Yeah,
didn't
so
we?
1922 to 2019 now.
Okay, thank you. As much as the brochure and everything and the pictures on, well, let's see, there's no numbers on the slides. Mike would be giving you a hard time. It looks like maybe 11 from the side. So there's the much needed renovations, and there's a picture of, yeah, that one. Numbers are really helpful on the slides. So here's my question about that is the very first one was for kitchen, and then was it for elementary school?
It was classroom, cafeteria, and gymnasiums at our elementary, at 18
it's
elementary.
on your brochure, but I was focused on your presentation. So cafeteria and gymnasium addition. So that was for all the elementary and middle schools. So for all those schools.
So it was for 18 of 18 schools.
And some might have been both or
correct.
Several new classrooms. So that was at 18 schools. And then we spent on new field houses.
There was field house.
$42 million for 3 schools.
But that included cafeteria and classroom additions also.
Okay, and we did start with those, if everybody remembers. But the expense, well, I was there from the beginning and I'm thrilled. I'm sorry for the overages. The parking lot, did you say that we redid the one also at Constance Lane, or was the $900K just for Cherry Valley?
It was just for Cherry Valley. We had to redo both parking lots, the staff and visitors lot, as well as the lot for our buses.
So that was 900, and then you had the 1.4 and the 1.5. So that's 3.9, and yet the overage was 6.
6, correct.
So there's another $2+ million. What was that on? I missed.
So if we take a look at our plan versus actual expenditures, as we go back to 2013, 2014, we can see that we were over budget on some projects. I would have to go dig into what those projects were. I really wanted to identify some of the overages since I've been here in 2018 and what kind of drove that.
So the other $2 million is just a spattering across the spectrum?
Across the 10 years, correct.
And we are seeking still some litigation about the Cherry Valley parking lot.
Correct, we are.
In litigation on that,
Yep.
correct? All right. And does this cover, does it capture the buildings that we're dropping right now?
This doesn't, Page Park and Styles, no, this does not. So we'll actually have 11 buildings that we've demolished totally. But that was not part of the facilities master plan.
It wasn't? I thought all of our drops were part of that.
We had 8.
8? And so we already did 8, and this is 2 additional?
We did 9, correct. And these are 2 additional.
What was the extra one that we hadn't planned for?
I think New Milford may have been added in. That had been being used as storage.
Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
So I apologize if you already touched on this, Mr. Phillips, but were any of the early childhood buildings included in this 10-year plan? I'm only asking because over the past couple of months, I've had some concerns brought to me just from community members about Buyer, for example, like how there's some of the plumbing issues, there's no hot water, things like that. So I just guess I'm kind of curious on how do we go about including them in this, and how do we determine how they get renovations? Is that on an as-need basis?
So all 4 early childhoods did receive interior renovations. They also received library renovations, so the classrooms, hallways received new flooring and painting. We did not renovate any restrooms at all across the school district during this facilities master plan. So that is something that as we move forward into a new facilities master plan that we will need to definitely look at and consider.
Thank you.
Your brochure says 3 early childhood centers were covered, but you're saying all 4 were?
Correct. So yes, Nashville, Fairview, Buyer, and we just completed Summerdale this summer.
Okay, this just says 3, that's all. Plus, we also dropped Dennis, right? Did we drop Dennis or
Correct.
sell it? What did we do?
It was demolished.
Okay. If you thought the buildings that they're in now were bad, Dennis was really a difficult facility for kids and staff. So that was a good move.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Finally, we have our first report on the status of the American Rescue Plan Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, ARP-ESSER. In tonight's report, the administration will take a look back at all emergency funding from the CARES Act dollars through ESSER 2 and ARP-ESSER. They will provide an update on the status of the grant award and plans for allocating the funding. Dr. Jarrett will begin the presentation this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. You know, as we kick off, I want to just provide some background because we're going to dive into all of the details of where $200 million is budgeted, and we can certainly dive into those details. But I wanted to start by kind of framing the big theme that we're trying to address here. With the pandemic occurring, and that is the ultimate why behind $200 million of funding, a problem that already exists in our community, which is our students needing more time, was exacerbated. Some of our students who most needed to be in school were our most disconnected during that pandemic. And if we believe as a board, as a community, as a leadership team, that all students can learn, and all students can learn at high levels, like I believe, and I think we all believe, then time being the variable is the theme of this work. Everything we do should be involved in how do we take what our students ultimately need more time. And I think there's really 2 ways we can give them that time. One is maximizing the time that we already have. We already have 172 days of student contact, 8 additional faculty days, and about a 7-hour school day. So that's one aspect of what we can do. And the other thing we can do is we can extend time, which basically means how do we have a longer day, week, and year so that there is more time. Because if you look at a student who has fallen behind, the best thing you can do for that student is to make sure they're getting everything out of their current school day so we're not losing more ground. And the way you gain ground is by adding time. So as we look at how we're spending $200 million, I want us to keep that theme of time, extending it and maximizing it in mind. There are really 4 subgroups that we've organized our cabinet around as we go out into the community to do this. And the first is extending time by growing community partnerships. We have a faculty and staff that is also very exhausted by this pandemic. They've been doing 4 different schedule changes last year. They are dealing with their own health and safety, and I believe are working really hard to give as much as they can to staff or to our students. And so one of the things we need to do, in our opinion, is use these dollars to grow community partnerships. How can community centers, how can the Boys and Girls Club, the Park District, other partners maybe we haven't even considered in the past, how can we create a process for those groups to come together and find ways to make our before and after school care better, to make our summer programming better, to connect to student interests? How can we get students to not only have more time, but have more quality time in their day, their week, and their year? The second issue is extending time, and this is going to be the biggest chunk of this. About 160 million of the 200 plus million is going to be in this area, and that is improving our facilities operations and our ITIS. And particularly our facilities, what we really mean there is one of the ways you can extend time in our district is go from 37% of our classrooms being air conditioned and having improved air quality to keep our students safer as well, is to address that core issue. So we will be talking about how, along with some of the ancillary projects we'll need to do to roofs and ceilings and things like that to support air quality. Ultimately, air conditioning means time, because it now means every building in our district could be used for up to 365 days a year if needed, or we desire to do so. Currently, there are literally probably close to 100 days where it's very, very challenging to use a number of our buildings. Finally, that maximizing time is really a 2-pronged strategy. One is, this is not related to the pandemic dollars, so we won't go as deep, but I think it's really important. We really need to focus on how we use our current grant dollars, like our Title I, our 21st Century, and our current site-based budgets that have come from evidence-based funding, to make sure that we have a really deep array of supports to maximize our current school schedules. And then finally, that staff I talked about needs to be renewed, supported, and developed. We have to come up with ways to refresh a group that is extremely burned out, have real significant substitute shortages, and again is often dealing with physical and mental challenges of the pandemic as well. So these are the 4 big buckets. We're going to have, our team is divided into groups of 2 or 3 to support these work streams. And today we're going to go into all the details of how the money is allocated in general terms as we go for grant approval. But I don't want us to lose sight of this really important issue of, this is about making sure dollars translate into more time and better time for our students. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over, I believe next to Greg to walk us through some of the specifics of how we will report back and get this approved.
Okay, the first thing we're going to take a look at is really just all 3 of the grants and how the money's been spent to date, and preliminary budgets for how especially the ARP ESSER is going to be allocated out. There are times as we've worked through this process, when you look at that 3rd bullet point of unallowable expenditures, where we thought that there may have been some things that we would be able to include in the grants, and as we've worked through the process, we've had to shift gears. And so there's been a number of amendments that have been made to the grants to actually make them fit what ISB is actually going to allow. And we're able to do that through grant amendments, and they've been good to work with as far as helping us shift the dollars around. So the first one we're going to take a look at there is just kind of a reminder of the big 3 buckets. The first was really all that pandemic related money that was available right away in March of 2020. That was really just response, and we'll go into a little bit of detail on that. The ESSER 2 money was really when the big pots of money started to come out for help for learning loss. And then the third ARP ESSER is the one that we're currently in the process of finalizing the grant for to get approval. First one up on the CARES Act, you can see there that the vast majority of the money was really spent on that instructional line item. And really that was technology related. It was Chromebooks, it was iPads, it was all the things that we needed to do to get the kids the supplies they needed to be able to operate in a home environment. There were hotspots included in that, just a number of things that we needed to do to gear up and support kids when they had to be in a remote environment. There was a lot of money that was spent on PPE. You know, we did need to get cleaning supplies. We needed to get, you know, the types of things that we needed to do to make schools safe when kids were starting to come back, you know, in the fall of 2020 as well. And then this grant was a little bit different than the ESSER 2 money and the ESSER 3 money in that there was an allocation to the non-public schools in this one. And so the non-public schools got a pretty good chunk of this. You can see there that they were allocated about $690,000. They did not spend all of it, and those unspent dollars are no longer available to them as well. And then we were able to capture some of our indirect costs, which is basically the district support for the pandemic response. So the next one up is the ESSER 2 grant, and we're in the middle of that one right now. The first two items you see there for digital equity are really not directly part of the direct ESSER 2 grant. The digital equity for fiscal year 21 was actually a competitive grant for technology related spending. The district was awarded that one in fiscal year 21. And then the digital equity for fiscal year 22 was actually leftover dollars from districts that didn't apply for the competitive grant from fiscal year 21. And ISB actually just kind of doled out those dollars. All you really had to do was apply for it and you were automatically awarded a certain number of dollars. And so those will be used probably in replacement cycles for technology. The other buckets there you can see are primarily related to facilities. Again, the air quality, extending that time that we have available for students in summertime, you know, if in fact that we do choose to go that route. The last bucket, and this is the one that's not yet approved, and this is the big grant. This is the ARP ESSER or ESSER 3. And you can see in those top line items right there, and Heidi is going to talk a lot more about this, and I'll let Mike talk about the improved air quality strategies. But this one had a specific set aside that had to be done for learning loss. And so there was a dedicated bucket of money that automatically had to be carved off and used for learning loss, catch up, and those types of things. And then we also just recently received this fall a direct grant to support some of our homeless students too. And so there's a separate set aside for those students as well. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Heidi.
Thank you. So just to reiterate, you know, our focus here, as Dr. Jarrett shared, is around time, both extending and maximizing time. And that's a slightly different frame than what we knew and understood in our first update to you in ARP ESSER. So we'll be sort of reframing our update in accordance to those four buckets. First is a summary of our tentative plan, which you just really kind of took a look at. And then just a reminder that we do have a charter allocation. It's a per pupil allocation in addition to the district allocation. We shared the same chart with you a few months ago. So the purpose of this report is really to report back. It's a status update. And this is one of the first projects that has gone through the board governance structure of beginning in planning and development and then having its first checkpoint in performance and monitoring. So these are the things that we discussed in planning and development during that time. The learning loss strategy, we wanted to monitor the number of credits recovered from our efforts over the summer, participation in those efforts, and then measuring our expenditures against the required 20%. So this is our first checkpoint. You'll be receiving an update like this every 6 months, and we'll continue to update these metrics. So first is to take a look at our tentative plan. And we have our original cost and then our revised estimates. There's no change in the charter. There's a slight reduction in instruction, and I'll explain that here in just a moment. We have an increase in social and mental health support from $2 million to $2.7. We also have a sizable increase in transportation and attendance from 6.9 to 8.3. You're going to hear significantly more about that this evening. We have approximately 1.2 million set aside for some community center learning support. That number has not changed. And then we have professional development still at just over 5 million. The decrease in instruction from 19 to 17 is to sort of keep us at our sum total of 36 and absorb the increases in transportation and social and mental health support. So I'll explain a little bit more about that in the next slides. Our first update, our first metric is to look at how summer went. How did credit recovery go? Did students come? Did they earn credits? What did we learn? So we offered, if you recall, we essentially quadrupled our credit recovery seat opportunities over the summer, and we offered it in 2 locations, at Roosevelt and at Jefferson. We also offered a remote option, so students could select either in-person or remote. And as a result of that, students recovered more than 1,000 credits, 1,106 credits. The vast majority of them came from our in-person program. A few came from our remote program. Participation, we started with 763 students enrolled in in-person credit recovery. We ended with 571. There are a variety of reasons for that decline in enrollment. Some of them include students who mistakenly signed up for both remote and in-person and had to drop one or the other. Others include being dropped for not participating and not coming. Some selected to go on vacation as credit recovery was getting started. There's a smattering of reasons why students dropped, but our ending enrollment was 571. In remote, there was no drop because it was a self-paced program, so we had 348 at the beginning and 348 at the end. Total, we had more than 1,000 enrolled at the beginning and about 919 enrolled in the end. What we learned from the remote credit recovery is that students really struggled overall. Many of them were enrolled in multiple courses, and so we found in moderating their activity that they would open and start multiple units and multiple courses at the same time, get overwhelmed, and not complete any of them. We also understand from their participation that they really needed a stronger adult support, and that self-paced was likely not the best option for them after a really challenging academic year. We found the opposite to be true in person. Students attended, they were dedicated, and some students even earned more than 2 credits. So they worked hard in that brief summer program to get back on track. Our progress toward the 20% mandate is 0 because the ISB has not fully approved our application for our BESSER yet. With regard to extending time and growing community partnerships, I want to share an update on where we are in our planning and our thinking. These are the same ideas that we shared with you previously, but I've included after the how, our strategies for how to do this work. First, we want to expand summer learning opportunities to more students. We want to do that by expanding school-based summer learning programs. The central office will continue to offer what we have offered, which is more than 3,000 seats dedicated to retreats and camp. And then we added expanded credit recovery. We will continue to do that. That is about our capacity as a central office team. We would love to see more school-based summer learning programs that are at the school level in the neighborhood. So we'll be working to support schools to expand those. Secondly is expanding after-school programs to extend learning time for students. This, we believe, comes through strategic budgeting for all schools and coaching and monitoring support for principals to oversee their budget. And then coordinating community services and partners. And how will we do that? We'll do that by sort of growing the idea of live, learn, play and creating community calls to action. You'll be hearing more about this in the next several weeks. We've just met with Alignment Rockford this morning to share and get some feedback, but essentially the concept is this. The district will create a call to action saying we have a particular need and we are inviting community partners to come to us with solutions in the form of a formal proposal that will be funded through American Rescue Plan dollars. So we are working on the structure and the process for that. We're also working on grassroots level outreach so that we can encourage as many community partners out there to join us and have their ideas funded to do good things for kids. Secondly, fourthly, is providing additional social emotional supports to students and using data to align resources to student needs. That looks like the Rosecrans contract that's going to be in front of you for approval at our next meeting. A concept that we've been working on for the last several months is hiring 16 full-time behavioral support professionals from Rosecrans. We have used discipline data and SEL screener data to examine the needs of each quadrant of the city, each feeder pattern. We have identified what are the top areas for disciplinary infractions, what are some preventative measures that we need to be looking at to support students before they get in trouble. And then also we've examined their SEL screener data to say where do they need some love and support? Is it self-efficacy? Is it a growth mindset? Is it self-management? What kind of support do students need? So by quadrant, by school, we've identified what those trends are, and we've identified then the allocation of resources to each school. Schools that have an assigned 1.0 FTE will have a Rosecrans professional embedded with them every day, 5 days a week. That Rosecrans professional will be providing small group support. They'll be providing after-school support. They will be 12-month employees, so this support can continue over the summer. And we're really looking forward to this as a supplement to our 1.0 social worker, at least, that's assigned to every school. They will be a team. As our Rosecrans professionals are onboarded, we will meet with them in small groups at the school level to create that team of supplemental support. The idea in using American Rescue Plan dollars in this capacity is to address a very acute need right now that is a direct result of the pandemic. And we want to make sure that we're providing enough resources to help nurture our students and help them thrive. Next is maximizing time, renewing, supporting, and developing staff. As much as our kids need, our adults need as well. And the old saying is you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think we need to recognize our teachers and our administrators are not just teachers and administrators. They are adults with their own issues through the pandemic. They are caregivers. They're looking after the needs of their families as well. And we want to make sure that we have support available for our adults. You will also see coming before you a contract for teletherapy services. This will provide virtual therapy visits for all RPS employees who are on our benefits package. This is a supplement to our existing Teledoc coverage where we can do the same thing for medical appointments. And then secondly is providing the tools and the professional learning to help really, have the tools and the resources available to deal with the ongoing challenges of the pandemic. So we've allocated enough money for 10 to 15 hours of job-embedded professional development for all employees that interact with students. That includes transportation, nutrition service workers, paraprofessionals, teachers, and administrators. We're working with our talent development team and some of our other administrators to really identify those priority topics and then when that training will occur. And then finally, the last metric to report on is our vaccine strategy. This number is incorrect. I apologize. I think I transposed the 0 and the 6. I think it was supposed to be 4,067, but the update as of just about a half hour ago is actually 4,200. 4,200 students are vaccinated. Schools' progress toward the vaccination threshold of 40% is not applicable at this point in time. Initially, when we gave our first presentation in the Planning and Development Committee, we thought we were going to set this threshold with some incentives at 40%, and we're not currently actively pursuing that strategy. If that comes back, we'll report on that progress. And then finally, we were asked to report on the number of remote days due to an outbreak by school. Now, that's a very specific thing. An outbreak is a formal designation from the health department, and a school closure is a formal thing. We have not done that. That's 0. However, we all know from our own personal experience that there are kids out on quarantine. So what are the numbers by classroom? And so we added an additional level of the data here in this report. So the number of students or classrooms that have been out on remote learning due to quarantine is 180 total for the year. 65 of those are early childhood. Now, I will say that I, as Mrs. Detman, might have 2 half-day sessions. Each of those counted as its own closure. And then elementary, 115, and in middle and high school, 0. The reason for that is the way that we have students organized. Students are very close to each other in early childhood, and they're with each other all day long in elementary. It is not the same in middle and high school. And then finally, this is how we explained intervention and mitigation in the Planning and Development Committee. Is, our vaccine strategy is we really want to our students to have the best possible in-person school experience. We want to avoid remote learning. We want to avoid mask mandates when we can. We want to avoid quarantines when we can. And we want to promote vaccinations, and we've done that through the gift card incentive. And so now I will hand it over to Mr. Phillips for the operations portion.
Thank you, Heidi. So as we continue that theme of time, as we extending time by improving our facilities operations and ITIS, we really tonight want to focus on updates on 2 areas: our HVAC upgrades, replacement and air conditioning infrastructure, and transportation. If you recall, back in August, we provided a project schedule, basically 10 schools a year over the next 3 years. The reason the first 10 schools were selected is because they were the schools with the least amount of air conditioning. In some cases, they had no air conditioning at all. So that's how those 10 rose to the top. Our engineering teams have been hard at work. So what we're looking at here is 100% design estimates of all 10 schools that we're looking to go for construction this next summer. We've also broken this down into the 2 buckets, ESSER 2 as well as ARP ESSER. So as you can see, our construction costs are approximately $70 million with a total all-in cost of $79.8 million in the first year. Really what's driving that cost is we're addressing some of our oldest buildings in this first year. If you think about East, Lincoln, and Washington, they have the least amount of air conditioning infrastructure and the most amount of work that has to happen to replace old steam piping to upgrade systems. Part of our responsibility is to kind of keep track of what our estimates were and where we're at throughout the ARP ESSER. So when we reported out in August, we had reported an estimate of $5.3 million spent in engineering services. That has changed slightly, and the reason behind that is because of this, the ARP ESSER has not been approved yet, and our engineering teams have been working and we need to pay them. We have moved $1.4 million in engineering services and $752,000 in program management fees into ESSER 2, so we could cut purchase orders and start paying our teams as they have produced throughout the fall. Next, we really wanted to give a breakdown by team and by location. So in the left-hand column, you see what the total breakdown is per line item. So for Riverdale and West, we have an all-in estimated cost of $8.7 million. And to the right, you can see where, what dollars will be allocated to ARP ESSER. 7.6 million in construction, 42,000 in program management fees, and 220, the contingency will fall into the ARP ESSER. So a total of 7.9 million of the Riverdale and West projects will be funded out of ARP ESSER, the remainder out of ESSER 2. As we move to Bloom, Lathrop, Guilford, and Spring Creek, we have an all-in cost of $16.2 million, with 14.4 of that being funded by ARP ESSER. And then lastly, Washington, Flynn, Lincoln, and East. And as you can see, Lincoln, East, and Washington, as I stated, are oldest buildings with the most work associated with them. We have a total estimated all-in cost of $54.8 million, 7.6 of that being funded by ARP ESSER, the vast majority being funded by ESSER 2. Also wanted to give the board an update on where we were at as far as bidding these projects and when you can expect them coming to board. So our Riverdale and West projects will be advertised for bid on January 25th, and they'll be coming for board consideration on February 22nd. East Flynn, Lincoln, and Washington will advertise for bid on February 3rd and come to board on March 8th. And then lastly, Bloom, Guilford, Lathrop, and Spring Creek will advertise to bid on February 17th, and we'll bring that to board for consideration on March 24th. I also wanted to talk about some of the project considerations as we look to start these projects and work with our contractors. As everybody knows, supply chain could be an issue and will be an issue as we enter this first year of construction. And in fact, we're really projecting that our larger schools, Guilford, Lincoln, East, could last 2 summers just due to lead times on some of this equipment. Our next challenge is our workforce, and that's competing projects, whether that's locally or regionally. That could be our gambling, our casinos that could be starting soon, and other projects. There's a lot of schools that have additional money also. And just the quantity of local mechanical, electrical, and plumbing contractors. So those are items that we've identified. We're working with our program manager and really starting to nurture our partnerships locally and regionally to make sure we have a good bidding pool for our projects. As we move on to looking at extending time through transportation strategies, we really want to look at removing current barriers in transportation, and we've identified 2 key areas. First, that's elementary students who live within 1.5 miles of their zone school. Currently, we are not transporting those students. We've identified 4 schools that we're looking to pilot, that being Constance Lane, Ellis, Lewis Lemon, and Whitehead. These schools have identified a lot of attendance issues with students that live within that 1.5 mile boundary, especially during the winter months. So how are we going to do this? We will continue our strategy of continue to hire bus drivers to be able to accomplish that task. And then lastly, we want to increase the number of early childhood students that we are offering busing to. And we, later on tonight, we'll hear about a contractor we're bringing forward with ALC, Student Transportation Solutions. And that's really how we're looking at supplementing transportation between ourselves, Sunrise, our current third-party contractor, and adding a second third-party contractor to assist us in this transportation. And that is our update, and we'll take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. I heard a phrase that just kind of triggered a question, and I'm wondering if, Ms. Devin, you might be able to speak to it a little bit more. You said that you would be reaching out to community partnerships for ideas on solutions that they could offer us. Is there a category of solution providers that could already be identified that we could go to with, our stated problems? I realize that could be a more expensive approach, but it seems like it's a little more sure-footed.
Can you give me an example of what you're thinking?
No, because I'm kind of just going on what you said. I mean, you had mentioned that you were going to reach out to community partners to see if they might have solutions. I'm assuming you already have the problems identified, and then you're looking for solutions, but I mean, are there not like solution providers to dang near every problem?
So yes, part of the goal is really getting narrowly focused because there are often more solutions than are viable to implement, and or they may be a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. So what we really want to do is be clear on the problem we're trying to solve so that we can go out and actively solicit for innovative solutions or existing solutions that need funding in order to expand or extend or just provide a stronger environment for students. So you can think about it like the invitation to participate from Alignment Rockford, which says we have this thing and we'd like you to volunteer your time. Except with a call to action, we're saying this is our problem, we're looking for your proposals and we'd like to fund them.
That makes sense, but it still seems like a slightly more random matching of solutions to problems. If we already know what the problems are and we go looking for someone who maybe can offer solutions, I mean, it's...
So I think I maybe not be explaining it very well.
Or I maybe not be understanding it very well. That's the more likely thing.
No, it's probably on my explanation. But we intend to do some intentional outreach on those, partners that we might already have existing partnerships with to say, let's do more. And let's see, can we fund their supplies, any furniture, technology? Instead of serving 60, could we serve 120? Those kinds of things. But we also know that there are lots of partners out there that want to work with the district and find it to be challenging for lots of different reasons. A lot of it has to do with process. So we're creating one streamlined system to vet all these ideas, and our goal is to say yes to an awful lot of things because the federal government has allocated money to us to help students recover. So we want to say yes to a variety of solutions and a variety of providers. And you're correct, some of them are likely already known, but we need to create and establish a system to help those ideas become reality and then monitor their progress over time.
And I think to really, really simplify it, our students need academic support and they need social emotional support, and we need kind of family and community support. But the key is what ideas out there are going to get students to show up for that. So when we say students need more time, what we're really saying isn't we can just throw an idea out there and automatically students will show up. What we know in our experiences, if this isn't well designed, if this isn't connected to student and family interests, if this isn't a space that feels safe and welcoming, students just aren't going to come, and particularly the students we most need to come. So that's what we are really saying here is we know our students need more academic support. We know they need more social emotional support. We know they need more adult connection and mentoring. That's not the issue. The issue is how do you get the ones who most need it to come? And that's where the community expertise is going to come. So the matching will be from a combination, and probably a lot of our existing partners will expand, but there may be some new ideas we haven't thought of as well.
I'm certain this was an issue of my understanding, and I'm hoping that we can have future discussion on randomness. I guess I can really only have that when I better understand exactly what problems we are trying to solve. And your explanation, Dr. Jarrett, helps a little bit, that part of the randomness is not knowing what students are going to show up when, where, and why.
if we build the Field of Dreams corollary, if we build it, they often don't come. Okay, and so we have to build something that students actually come to. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of money wasted. So we don't presume to have all the answers of how we're going to get students to come. That's where we're hoping for some real innovation. Is how do we get students to show up for what they need? How do we get families to want to connect with that? And we have some providers that do an amazing job of that. We have some expertise right here on the board with Mrs. Muhammad, who does this very work as part of her day job. So it can work. It happens in places like Washington Park Community Center. So some of this may be just scaling it up, but we really have thousands of students that we need to reach, with time being the variable. And the big challenge is how can we get people to students and families to feel comfortable and committed to getting as much of that time as possible. Money is often the obstacle. Now it's going to just be that commitment piece.
Ms. Stedman, you had mentioned that we're exploring the possibility of working with more grassroots organizations. So once people are able to give their formal proposals, do they have to have the status of like a not-for-profit, or if they don't have that type of certification, if they're able to show that they have like outcomes or results from the community work that they do, would they still be eligible to apply for these funds?
I really appreciate that question, and we are finalizing that aspect of things right now, and identifying who are eligible organizations that, in alignment with the rules for subcontracting under the grant, are eligible to receive funding. So I don't have a direct answer for you right now because I don't know yet, but that is today's question of the day. This morning in Alignment Rockford, for example, one of the stakeholders asked about congregations who aren't required to hold a 50C3. 1C3, thank you. Certificate, license, paper, designation, exemption, thank you, and yet would be a great provider of service. Is there a way that they can be funded, perhaps through an additional fiscal agent, like a flow through? So that was a question that was posed this morning. I don't have an answer yet, and thank you everyone for your patience and corrections.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, does anyone have any questions on the consent agenda items for the next two meetings? If not, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Appreciate your stepping in on that. Mr. Rollins, if you would take the floor and lead the Planning and Development Committee portion of the meeting.
So the first item is a transportation contract with ALC Student Transportation Solutions. We talk a lot and hear a lot about our bus driver shortages, but we also have acute shortages through our subcontractor Sunrise, which does our early childhood and special needs and various special programs. They have not been fulfilling their contract, and they don't seem to be able to get the staffing that they need. So Mr. Slife has identified this company, ALC, and the model that they've got is that they go out, and we were talking about community partners, they go out and find community groups that may have the resources to provide these services or potentially to us. A church that has a bus and a bus driver, they get the bus driver qualified, because you do have to be qualified to be a school bus driver under Illinois state law. And then they contract with that organization, and then we contract with ALC, and they then have this pool of available resources, both people and equipment, that they can use to hopefully supplement what we've got and hopefully meet some of our shortages. And Mr. Slife is here. I guess I'd invite him up to, and if anybody has any questions about this. Does anybody have any questions? Nope. All right. Guess not. So that will be brought to the board for approval at the January 11th, 2022 board meeting. I've got something on my script here that's not on board docs. It's just an FYI heads up. so I'll just read it. Preliminary budget requests for Human Resources and Equity. Administration is updating the fiscal year 2023 budget presentation schedule. Human Resources and Equity will now be presenting their fiscal year 23 budget presentations at the January 25th, 2022 board meeting. And then I've got the following preview of consent items. The following items will be presented on the consent agenda for the January 11th, 2022 board meeting. Tier 1 project management software. PM Web is a comprehensive web-based construction project management software that provides a thorough set of management functions in a single configurable package. The platform provides real-time interactive business intelligence dashboards and reports that are graphic, rich, and actionable. This reads like a marketing piece, comprising all aspects for tracking and managing capital programs, projects, and assets. Currently, capital projects budgets are tracked across multiple spreadsheets. Construction documents, which include plans, specifications, submittals, and closeout documents, are saved in project folders on the shared drive. I mean, essentially what's going on here, we've got, as we've just been talking about, we're going to be doing a lot of construction over the next few years with all these federal dollars that have been showered on us. Mr. Phillips is saying we don't really have a good way of tracking all of that internally. This is a better way of doing it. It's a web-based application. I did ask the question, and then can we make sure that we get all our data back if we need to? He assured me that we can at the end of the contract. So does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. Moving on to the next piece. Tier 1 basement build-out for the transition vocational program. This is a program for special ed kids. It was initially housed at Page Park. With the closing of that building, the program was moved into what used to be Wilson Aspire. The space at Wilson exceeds the need of the program. Updating the basement of the administration building to house the transition vocational program will help to centralize the program and allow for students to participate in internships, externship, job shadowing, job coaching, and real-world work experiences at the administration building for various departments. And I guess I do have a question about this one. So the estimate is going to cost about $1 million to do this. They're currently at Wilson. I mean, is this really cost effective? We couldn't just downsize the space at Wilson?
So the benefit is we're able to provide higher quality experience to the students in the program. We don't have to transport them to every experience. We're able to provide a lot of those opportunities within this building for a handful of, please, Mr. Vosberg. And so it's not just about the space, it's also about the quality of the program and where we're allowed to provide, not allowed, available to provide opportunities for them.
Right. The idea would be to house the program here and then have internships throughout the different departments here in the building, like with. Can you hear me okay now? Is this better? Okay. To house it here would be to bring the kids into the different departments in the administration building to do various internships here in our departments. We could do nutrition services, some sorting with HR documents, and just mail room, delivering the mail from room to room, things like that, which we don't have available in our current setting.
Okay.
Good evening. One of the things to take into consideration here, these are students who have actually already graduated, but for whom we are legally responsible to provide vocational education experience through the age of 22. And so it doesn't really make sense to have them in a regular school because we are trying to ensure that they have quality, as Mr. Vosberg was explaining, they have quality real life experiences outside of an education setting, which while we're education here, we are not, we are the administration building. And there are a lot of other businesses around us, very close by, where the students can also gain experience. So that's why they were housed out at Page Park and were then bused to different businesses and locations throughout the city and county.
So if we house them, if we put them here, we won't be busing them anymore?
We may be busing them to certain locations, but they would have a lot more availability on site here to obtain experience.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? And the third item, Tier 1, Rosecrans, I think Ms. Detman already alluded to this. The administration recommends partnering with Rosecrans to provide student assistant professionals housed in schools to provide real-time support with students that are struggling to integrate and be a part of the learning environment due to other mental, social, and behavioral challenges. And this is, again, this is being paid for, at least currently, through the federal funding that we're getting. I think Ms. Detman went through those numbers in her presentation. Does anybody have any follow-up questions on that? Okay, this is an easy one. The following item will be presented on the consent agenda for the January 25th, 2022 board meeting. Bond refunding, resolution to move forward on the bond refunding with Stiefel, Nicholas and Company. Are there any questions or discussion on this consent item? My question was, do we have any final numbers or projected final numbers on that, what the actual savings will be?
We do not. The actual bond sale is actually on the 25th of January, and so what will be coming that night is the actual bond purchase agreement with Stiefel. So we'll have numbers that day, and we anticipate actually getting a rating on the 12th of this month, and so we'll know whether we're eligible for a bond upgrade as well.
They're selling the bonds the day that we approve it? Correct. Or what are we approving on the 25th?
It will actually be the sale of the bonds.
We'll be approving the sale of the bonds?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And we'll know the final numbers at that point?
Correct. We'll have them that night.
Have interest rates moved? Do you know?
They've actually, on the end of the curve when we're at right now, they've actually been fairly flat.
Okay.
On the longer end of the curve, actually yesterday they shot up pretty significantly, so I don't know what they did yet today, but you know, in the area where we're at right now, we should still be in pretty decent shape. They're stable right now.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions about that? That completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. I'll present for the Governance Committee. We don't have any items on the agenda requiring any action. We do have the usual consent agenda items for January 11th, the minutes, the purchase orders, hiring incentives for hard-to-fill teaching positions. We have a workers' compensation settlement coming up and Freedom of Information log, which is also on the 25th, along with contract purchase orders. We have no speakers, but I have asked, and this, I guess I could have asked this question during the ESSER money piece. On page 18, it spoke to have the best in-person school experience and avoid remote learning, but we also know that there may be remote learning associated with snow days, or if we have schools that are so severely impacted with COVID. I mean, so I did ask Dr., I don't know who you wanted to give this to, Dr. Jared, for an update about how prepared we are for the remote learning, because we haven't really done it this fall. And so where are we at with that, with teachers as well as with students and families and community hotspots, all those kind of things?
Thank you, Mrs. McCulloch. Yes, we've been really ramping up our preparation this week in anticipation that for the next 2 to 3 weeks, we may be at risk at school-based movement into remote learning. So I have both Mrs. Detman and Mr. Gallagher heading up that work to ensure that we are finalizing very simplified and streamlined instructions for staff. One of the bigger challenges we will face is elementary students, because they don't typically bring their devices home, so we have to make sure we kind of anticipate and make the decision before it gets too late in the day. So, for example, if the storm ends up significantly worse than we expect tonight, and we would have to call our first snow day for tomorrow, we would potentially run the risk of being a little flat-footed tomorrow. So I certainly want to prepare the board for that risk. Although I think we've been told by our facilities and transportation team that that's a relatively moderate risk based on the weather report, but I'm sure we'll be up at 4 a.m. texting and talking about it. But the COVID risk is equally heightened at this point. And so we want to make sure that if we do make the decision to address something with rising rates, a key will be able to get device and chargers home to our elementary students. That will be our biggest challenge. Our middle and high school students tend to have pretty free access with those devices. So Mrs. Detman and or Mr. Gallagher, anything you would like to add on the specifics of our preparation?
I would just add, you mentioned two scenarios. One is the e-learning, which is a closure, as Dr. Jarrett alluded to inclement weather, which is 1 day at a time. So that is very simple. We have 5 hours of asynchronous independent learning for elementary students. We generally run our bell schedule for secondary students. We have allocations of time, devices go home. The other is something that is more challenging, which is a multi-day closure. And you mentioned hotspots. Maybe we have some families that don't have access to broadband. We are finalizing our guidance now, but it is not anything new. We actually sent guidance out for quarantined classrooms on September 21st of this year. And this is pretty much that same guidance, just a little simpler, so that we can share both for an e-learning day due to snow and a multi-day closure due to a COVID-related reason. And essentially for our elementary students, they're going to go home with devices, but they're also going to go home with a packet of printed materials at their grade level prepared by their teacher. They'll also go home with a cover letter explaining expectations for parents and students as well. So we'll be sending out that guidance in the next day or two to our principals and then our teachers to make sure we are all very clear on this same guidance for those two different scenarios. Secondary school is much easier. They are already using Google Classroom. And so it's primarily running through their bell schedule. We have allocations of time there. So I think we are in a good position currently with our tools and our resources. We also need to update again our families and make sure that we have the resources available at the school level for hotspots and also low cost and no cost broadband, and that's all a part of our e-learning plan.
Well, there's also single day outages. So we had a water main break at Guilford High School, for example.
Correct.
And so we said we were going to switch to e-learning, and then that didn't go so well. So you want to just update us on
Sure.
Why that strategy is not working when we have individual situations like that?
So I think that in particular didn't work because we did not communicate a reminder about what the e-learning plan is and what those expectations are. We, I think, perhaps made an assumption that that was well known by staff and students, and it wasn't. And I think that was a mistake in our communication to make that decision quickly. But we were able to monitor that and look at exactly how many students were engaged and how many teachers were engaged throughout the day, and that let us know that we didn't quite get it right. And so we're working on that streamlined, simplified, repetitive messaging, both for teachers, but also for students and for parents. So if we close for 1 day, here's what you do. If we close for multiple days, here's what we do. And we'll have one template of a cover letter that will go home to across the district when a school or classroom is closed.
So when you say you were able to monitor it, would you say that you had how many engaged, a percentage?
Of students?
Students and staff?
Around 40% of students, higher for staff.
Are there any other questions, though, about the remote switch? Because I can see this as just being really difficult. You know, you haven't done it for
Well, and it's hard. It's hard for families. You know, I mean, we want students to be engaged. We want to provide some synchronous learning opportunities. And for some of our youngest students, that will be like a read aloud and a morning circle. They'll do some small group instruction, is what we have in our guidance. But we also understand that When there's a quick closure, many families have to scramble for childcare, and that, protected learning space is a real challenge. So our guidance to provide both digital but also print, and then to monitor student activity and engagement so that teachers can prepare for instruction when they're back together again in person.
Well, and again, if it's overnight, they're not going to have packets printed. You had a snowstorm,
Well,
had a water main, whatever.
Well, we've asked, we are asking, did ask in September, and we'll ask again, that actually teachers do have these packets of materials ready, and we've provided samples by grade level and content area so that our banks of resources to pull from.
Do you have any idea of how many are prepared?
I do not have that, no.
We've really raised the issue this week as we've returned back with the specter of bad weather and COVID-related shutdown. So I know Mr. Gallagher is working directly with the principals to ensure that that is being cascaded at the building level, those expectations, as well as in partnership with the academic team. And Mr. Barthel, who is unable to be here tonight, is also working on the technology side of this.
Okay. Well, it's two sides, right? The family and the staff, and so it's a huge lift on that. But the other lift is bus routes, because somebody stated earlier that we did get an email saying all the bus routes were going to be running with COVID. Can you update us on where we're at with that?
So yes, as we entered January, we did have a plan of adding 2 routes that would not be covered to pivot if COVID did hit us. Unfortunately, we increased the number of COVID cases within the transportation drivers to 10, with an additional 13 that called out today. So we are going for the rest of this week with 2 routes that won't be running, and we will have to continue to assess the situation as we move forward.
And that would rotate. This week there's 2 and the families have been notified?
They are being notified, correct. Yep, we were working with communications, and Mike and his team put notifications out. Our website was down, so we were not able to load up the routes for this week as of this afternoon, but those will be going out.
And so that the technology situation that we're dealing with, will Kronos, do we have a timeline on when that will be back up?
Well, the best guess on that one right now is they will not have a fix in place until January 28th. So we're probably at least, well, we know for sure this upcoming payroll, and then probably 2 more after that, or we're still going to have to be on this manual timesheet process that we're following right now. And they're going to try and bring some people online about a week from now as a test. And if that goes well, there's a chance we might be back up earlier, but right now they're saying it's going to be at least January 28th.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for keeping the schools open. I mean, I think it's difficult. I don't know how other board members feel, if anybody wants to weigh in, but it's difficult for the students to learn, and this trying to pivot back and forth between remote and the other doesn't do anyone any favors, but we do need to meet the needs of our families. All right, does anybody have any other items to bring to the board? So I see no lights. If there's no further comments or agenda recommendations, I'll take a motion in a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.